is a joint effort. I am the director of the Center for Inquiry Canada in Vancouver. So we work on promoting critical thinking, evidence-based decision-making, humanist values, everything like that. Besides that, we also have the Clergy Project, members of the Clergy Project, which is an organization for ex-religious leaders, people who used to be religious leaders and are now atheists. And we have Dan Barker, our representative of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the FRF, not the FRFF, which I messed up earlier. So I'll be giving each of those a chance to speak. But first, I would like, on the behalf of CFIC, to acknowledge that this event is held on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Quitquetlin First Nation, and that our virtual participation from coast to coast and around the world is taking place on the ancestral and unceded territory of Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples. We also acknowledge that not all people come here as migrants and settlers, recognizing those who were brought involuntarily as enslaved people or by means of human trafficking. And we pay tribute to their ancestors and to their descendants. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improve relationships between nations, peoples, and cultures, to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and to consider how we can each try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I would also like to quickly address what is probably one of the most obvious issues. We really strive for diversity, and in this panel, I've worked very hard. We have diversity of religion. We have Christian, ex-Christian, ex-Muslim, ex-Jewish. We have racial diversity. We do not have gender diversity. This is an all-male panel, and it's something that a lot of people have commented on in looking at the advertisements about this. I'd like to do my best to assure people this is not for lack of effort. There are two factors involved. First is the fact being that we are ex-clergy. The majority of religions exclude women from taking positions of religious leadership. So because of that fact, the majority of our membership is male. In addition, our female members, we did reach out. I myself and Lon both reached out to our female members. None of them were able to make it here for this time, for this event. We will have them, do our absolute best to have them for future events. So this is not for lack of effort or awareness. We really, really did want to have female participation. It just didn't work out for this
We
event.
just don't do well with the ladies, do we?
Yeah.
That's
So
Well, I speak for
please do
except for
please do
Duane.
bear with us and our entirely male representation here. We do have very, very active female members within the group, and we welcome female ex-clergy within the group. So all of that getting out of the way to start off with, I would like to get started. So today's format, very, very simple. It's 3 hours. We have lots of time. And I assure you, among our members here, we have fascinating stories. This is going to be fairly fast paced. The first portion is going to be done in a more Dan handling it as a moderator, simply asking us questions and us responding. You'll be more of a passive audience. However, the second half, we will be opening up for Q&A, free for all, both from the people in our live audience and from the people in our Zoom audience to ask questions, whatever they would like to know about our panel and our members. So I would like to quickly give Lon Ostrander a chance to speak. Lon is the president of the Clergy Project. So he's going to talk a little bit about TCP, what it is, and what we do. Take it away,
Okay,
Lon.
we'll try to do that. So I guess we can start with a mission statement, which is basically to provide support, community, and hope for current and former religious leaders who no longer hold supernatural beliefs, which means we're all atheists. And what else you want me to? That's our mission statement. There's
How many members?
there's about 1,230 of us now registered on the roll, which will not be called up yonder. And about 14% of our folks are female. And then the question that follows is always how many are current and how many are former religious leaders. And we say about 25% are current, but that's because they tell us that they're current when they join us, but they may neglect to notify us when they actually escape. So it's probably under that, okay? But we just don't know. If I see anybody mention in a post that they've left the church and they're now plumbers, carpenters or something, I make sure I make that correction. But I'm sure we don't hear from a lot of people. You know, once they're out, maybe they don't need us anymore. They're great. We escape. So.
And I would like to add, just to clarify here, when we talk about current religious leaders, this is people who are still in positions of religious leadership, but are atheist. One of the most common accusations we hear against the group is that we're trying to infiltrate atheists into churches or into religious groups. It's actually the dead opposite. The vast majority of those who are still in positions of religious leadership desperately want to get out. And our main job is helping them to get out. And you'll be hearing our stories a little later, but one of the biggest challenges is for a lot of these religious leaders, their only job ever has been as a religious leader. Their education is as a religious leader. Their house is provided to them by their church. If they tell their church that they are an atheist, they lose their job immediately. They have no prospect or limited prospects of getting a new job, and they lose their house.
And they get stoned.
Yeah,
everybody.
Yeah, that's right. They're enemy number one in the group that used to support them. So it's not that we are trying to infiltrate. We are trying to get them out, but we're trying to get them out safely with a safety net that they have something to move into when they get out. So churches that are opposing us, you should not be opposing us. You should be welcoming us and working with us, because we're trying to get all the atheists out of your churches. We don't want them there. They don't want to be there. All right.
So we want to get them out with minimal trauma to them into their congregations.
That's right. Yeah. And I would now like to turn things over to our moderator, Dan Barker. He will introduce himself, but he is the president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And we're very, very grateful to have him here to moderate the panel for us today. Dan.
Well, thank you, John. This is a real pleasure. And to meet all of you and to see you again in person. We used to have all these meetings by Zoom, but now I think this is the first actual public event, formal public event of the Clergy Project.
We have had people speak at panels at other larger events, but this is the first event for TCP, which is dedicated only for the Clergy Project.
So before we move on, since this is a collection of religious leaders, former religious leaders, the next item on the order of service will be to pass the collection plate, which we were all very good at doing in our ministries in the past. But we appreciate all of you for coming and for attending. The Clergy Project started formally in 2011, and it was a result of three different providential, you might say, occurrences. The philosopher Daniel C. Dennett and his colleague Linda Lascola were trying to research and study preachers who no longer believe. And I think Linda and Daniel are watching today. So if you are, we say hello to you. They're watching remotely. And in my life, since I left the ministry in the 1980s, I had come into contact with many current and former clergy. And so when Linda and Dan were doing their study, their question was, well, how do we find them? Can you just go knock on the door of a church and say, hey, is your pastor an atheist? You can't do that. So I was able to give Linda a number of names, which she then, as a qualitative researcher, was able to interview, which became a kernel for their study, Preachers Who Don't Believe, which was published in Journal of, I think, a psychology journal. That then got a lot of readers who said, well, me too, me too. So many more came out of the closet. The third strand was Richard Dawkins. In Copenhagen, we were having dinner one night, and Richard Dawkins just happened to mention, you know what, there's a lot of people in the Church of England and a lot of ministers and other churches who don't believe. How do we help them? They're trapped, and it's not just like changing a job, it's you're changing your entire life. And so those three strands came together, and the Richard Dawkins Foundation put up the original money to create the forum for the Clergy Project. There's a private forum now that members and participants go to for help, to share ideas, to trade comments. And we appreciate all of those strands working together at one time. So I told you I used to be a preacher. For 19 years, I was a minister, evangelical, gospel, Bible-believing preacher who thought the world was going to end. And as Richard Dawkins wrote in the foreword to my book, Godless, in which I tell my story, he said, Dan wasn't just a preacher. He was the kind of preacher you wouldn't want to sit next to on a bus. And I was that guy. I mean, it was your lucky day, Shlomo, when God directed you to sit next to me on the bus so that I could share with you the good news of the gospel of Jesus. Well, I changed my mind, and I'm not going to tell you that story today. You can read about it in the book. But today we want to hear stories of other clergy that are here. And maybe we'll just go down. We'll start with Mohamed. I'm going to ask you three questions to start with. And instead of telling your whole story from beginning to end, let's break it up into three parts. The first one will be, what was your ministry? What was your religious leadership, and why? And did you truly believe? That's what I want to know. Or were you faking it? Then we're going to take a second round. Why did you change your mind? And I think a lot of our viewers are more interested in that. What was the reasoning that you changed your mind? Then we'll have a third round. What happened since then? What was the fallout? How did you land on your feet? Or did you land on your feet? Or what happened with your family, friends, and relatives? So Mohamed Cisse is a former Imam Muezzin. Is that how you say it? Muezzin?
Imam is good.
Okay, but didn't you sing the Quran and all of that?
Muezzin is the one who called for the prayer.
Yeah, call for prayer.
And then when you guys come to the prayer, I'll be again the one leading the prayer.
So Mohamed is from the Ivory Coast, and he was basically raised to be a religious leader.
Yeah.
So take part one of that question and just tell us why and what your story was that led you into that clergy led, and if you truly believed.
Okay, well, in a traditional Islamic setting, this is how I would start. I would say, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala ali Sayyidina Muhammad wa sallam. Nahmadullah wa na'udhu bihi min shururi anfusina wa, blah, 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 blah. It basically means like...
Shall I translate for you?
These are traditional narrative of, an imam. Before you start anything, you will say on behalf of the name of God and peace be upon the prophet. And that's like literally my second language. My primary language is French. Second language is Arabic. And the third language is English. But my zero language is Mandingo. That's my ethnic society. So yeah, I grew up. I was born into an imam family. My dad was imam. We have a mosque in our house, and it was the one single place for about a community of about, let's say, in a radius of 2,000 people. Everybody would come to my dad's house to pray. He married my mom from an imam's family, and he was the imam of an entire town of about 50,000 people. So I'm imam from 0 to 100. Yeah. And the second question is, did I really believe? Yeah. Well, it's not until I met the Clergy Project that I started thinking, did I believe, or was I prone to believe? But I'm going to simplify the question. Did I believe? Yes. I genuinely believe that there was an Almighty up there who guides everything. And I preached that. I demonstrated scientifically that from the Quranic verses, that is composition of specimen coming from the human, does this, blah, 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 blah. Yes. And again, I would be the type of clergy you don't want to sit next to in a bus. Yeah.
So Duane Grady is also a former clergy, a Pentecostal, is that?
Oh,
right?
yeah. Hi.
So tell us your story. Why did you go into the ministry, and did you really believe it?
Oh, I absolutely believed that. In fact, the world was going to end any second, and Jesus was coming back. I mean, we were waiting for him, but I was this embarrassing to say, I was saved. What a weird word. In 1974, at the middle part of the Jesus people movement. Anybody over 100 might remember the Jesus people. They were like hippies with Bibles. Only they bathed once in a while, and that got me in. There was a community of hippie type young people, so that drew me in, and that started my Christian path. And a series of events. I'm writing a book. Buy the book. I'm not telling you everything now, but the series of paths led me to work to start working in a famous ministry called Teen Challenge in 1977. And that led me to Bible college, and that led me to other things. How long do I have here? Because 3 hours is a long time to fill.
Till I
I
get
can
back
do
to
it.
my chair.
Huh?
Till I get back to my chair.
Yeah. Okay, never mind. I
That
could
was
make jokes.
David Wilkerson.
Yeah, David
Teen
Wilkins
Challenge.
started in New York. I don't name people. I don't want to name people that I worked with, but there were a lot of them really good people, and they really genuinely cared about what they were doing. And what Teen Challenge was a rehab center for young men between the ages of 16 and 24 who basically drug and alcohol, and refugees from the street, etc. So they're doing really good work, and this was a foundation that really hooked me and strung me on, because I love the idea of helping my fellow man, my fellow human being. I'm still like that, oddly, but that's a good foundation. So one thing leads to another, and I guess I was 45 from 17 years old to 45, so 14 I get saved. 17 I start working sort of ministry, Bible college. So I was 45 when I figured out, hey, wait a second, something's off here.
Well, we'll get to that in the second pass.
Thank you. That was my cue to shut up, isn't it?
No, but did you pastor? Were you a missionary?
I did some pastoring, not a lot, but I did a bit of it. But my heart was in not evangelism. So I don't understand that word. I never went anywhere I wasn't invited. I never spoke to anybody who didn't want to listen. So what kind of evangelism is that? But ultimately, I traveled around. I went to different countries. I preached up and down the U.S. I got involved with internet, like different culture churches. I was very involved with Nigerian churches in Toronto and all the way up and down the East Coast. I was mainly involved in that. I also, in developing countries, I got involved with education. We were able to supply curriculum to let's say Haitian schools, Dominican, in the middle of Trinidad. Trinidad's a civilized country, more or less, but in the middle of it, there's a whole area of poverty so we were able to put stuff there too. Ultimately, I had work going on in about 13 different countries, Kenya, Nepal, mainland China, Cuba, I forget them all now. But this was my motivation for moving forward in ministry. Now, I did pastor a couple of times, but that wasn't really my biggest drive. How's that for an answer? Is it too vague or?
No, very good.
Okay,
Well, you're establishing your religious leadership credentials, basically.
there you go.
So Lon Ostrander
Hey,
is
Dan.
the current president of the Clergy Project, and you were also Baptist/Pentecostal preacher?
Wesleyan.
Wesleyan. Oh, Wesleyan.
That's a
Okay.
whole nother thing.
But didn't you have Pentecostal background?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll tell a little bit about that. So I was brought up in a Christian home, and we lived out in the country, and there was a church fair down the road, Pentecostal church, had a couple lady pastors, just a tiny church, because lady pastors get the tiny churches, That's the way that works. So anyways, they came and knocked on our door, evidently, and invited my parents to come and visit the church. And so evidently my parents thought that was a good idea. And we started attending this little Pentecostal church out in the country with a wood stove to keep warm. And on Easter, sometimes the little girls, they'd be all dressed up in their fancy Easter clothes, and they'd get too close to that furnace to keep warm, and then they'd singe all their pink fluffy coats or whatever. So that was always fun to watch. And then we moved to town, and some folks invited us to the Baptist church, regular Baptist church, because they had the newest building in town. That seemed like that was a good move. And so I grew up in a Christian home. Like my father was a blue collar worker, worked in factories basically. And then I'm going to talk about my call into ministry.
And did you believe in what?
Well, I believe, but I didn't know any better. My default position was, of course, there was a God. Of course, it was the Christian God. And it really hadn't occurred to me that there was another alternative to that. But at the same time, I knew there were problems with the Bible, contradictions and historical errors and silly stuff. So I was trying to figure it out. I was exploring all these different denominations, hoping that somebody actually got it all sorted out and figured it out. But not so much. And so later, then I got married, working in the factory, 1991. I was 41 years old. I was at a church camp, and somebody was doing the treasurer's report. And I was daydreaming. I was probably looking at a car magazine or something, really fun. And strangely enough, I felt a strange warming come over me, coincidentally, just as John Wesley described. Okay? No words, no visions. Made no sense whatsoever, but I knew instantly I was supposed to become a pastor. Went to my pastor. He took me to the district superintendent, and they at the time had a program where I could take a lot of courses through Indiana Wesleyan University by correspondence. A lot of writing, loved it. Probably neglected my teenage boys and my wife because I was so involved with studying, because I gotta do it. He's calling me. And then I got enough courses in that I was licensed to be a pastor. And so, yes, again, I believe there must be a God. I hadn't thought of the alternative. And so the idea that there was an alternative, that there was no God, came quite a bit later, actually, after I left the pulpit, 6 years after I left the pulpit. So I'm one of the lucky ones. I wasn't caught in the pulpit not believing. No, I left the pulpit to go back to industry so I could make a living. And then at the age of 57, and I was in Japan at the time, and it occurred to me, I think I read The God Delusion and some of Christopher Hitchens stuff. That makes sense. So tomorrow I'm going to be an atheist.
So we'll get to that.
Yeah.
How long did you preach?
So I only pastored for 6 years. My first church was in Georgia. I'm from New York. My first church was in Georgia, and I very quickly got into a lot of trouble because some Black folks showed up at our church on Wednesday night, and that was my fault. I invited them. And I was told that was not to happen again. And so we left that church after only a year. The Wesleyans have a particular, I call it the silly season, when if you're going to resign and leave, or you're going to throw your pastor out or whatever, you do it at this time of year, and everybody does the big shuffle. So then I went from there to Pennsylvania, and pastored a small Wesleyan church in Loganton, Pennsylvania, and very soon got into some hot water for being too cordial with those Amish people. You ever hear that? Yeah, so it's pretty much the same all over.
So John Lombard, you were also an evangelical Bible believer, true believer.
Yeah.
Tell us about your ministry. Why did you go in? Did you feel a calling, or what did you do?
Okay, first of all, I grew up in Ontario in a tiny village of 900 people. My dad was the town's Anglican minister. And generally speaking, Anglican minister in a small town means like very, very liberal, just kind of go to church on Sunday and read your prayer book, and that's it. My dad was evangelical, charismatic, We had exorcisms and like just you name it. So I was born and raised in the middle of all of this. I was a very passionate believer. By 16 years old, I was preaching from my dad's pulpit. 18, went off to Bible college to train as a missionary. 1993, headed off to China to be a missionary in China. This was 4 years after Tiananmen Square, the events of Tiananmen Square. So China was still very, very closed. Being a missionary was 100% illegal. I went there officially as an English teacher in university. If I was caught, at the best, I would be kicked out of the country. At worst, I could be imprisoned. And that's actually the reason I went, because after Bible college, I was having a lot of questions and doubts. And I had read all the biographies of missionaries, and all the missionaries that got biographies written were martyred or suffered. So I figured if I want to really show my faith in God, in the gospel message, I needed to go to a place where I was most likely to suffer for the gospel. And so I went to China. Fortunately, I ended up not being imprisoned, suffering too much or anything like that. But I did. I went there as a church planter, evangelist, helping evangelize, convert Chinese to Christianity, helping to start and support illegal underground churches. And for my first 5 years in China, that's what I did. And then I got out of it, and we'll talk about that in the next round.
Shlomo, Levin.
Yeah.
You were a rabbi, you were in Israel, right?
I did my studies in Israel, and then I served as a rabbi in the United States.
In the United States. So tell us how that happened, and were you a believer? And what was it like being a rabbi?
So I was a modern Orthodox rabbi here in the United States about 14 years in a few different cities. I'll just share with you, I think, why did I become a rabbi is a difficult question to answer, which I've reflected on quite a bit. I think for me, it was not the opportunity to preach religion per se. It was much more the religious community, to be part of the religious community. And also, I think it's very special that as a rabbi, you have the opportunity to be involved in the most moving and intimate transitional moments of people's lives. You're there at weddings and at births and at moments of crisis. And I think that opportunity to be a helper and to touch people in that way is something that attracted me to the rabbinate in particular. And did I ever truly, how much did I truly believe in the faith? And I've reflected on that too. It's a hard question to answer. I think there's a question of how much we examine that ourselves and at what times in our lives we examine that. I'm going to say I think so. Although looking back, probably the seeds of a little hesitation were always there from the start.
But when you prayed, did you think God was listening to you, or were you just doing a ritual?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think there were times when I did feel that belief.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can say they feel that 100% of the time when you pray 3 times a day, every day. I do think that was there for me some of the time.
Oh, now to the fun part. Tell us, however you want to, philosophically or socially or whatever, why did you change your mind? We'll go back to Mohamed.
Well, I was the first child of my mother. And my mom was the second child of her father. Her sister was banned from the family because she dared love someone and went with the person without marriage. So her father banned her from the family. So my mom, as the second child, is now the princess. Everybody loves her. My dad was about over 40. And as an imam, as a Muslim leader, traveling to the city, he married my mom at the age of 13. My mom got me when she was 14. And when she was 16, I was 2, she was abandoned. But at the time, I don't have the ability to think of all of that because you just like a sheep, you follow the crowd. And whatever God does, that's what's okay. Well, like a cancer, I think I'm one of those pieces that's in the wrong spot. I was really bothered by flies and I didn't like the heat. Well, I was born in a tropical country. So the idea of finding a solution against flies and mosquitoes pushed me a little bit toward the Christian communities. With them and started mosquito nets and stuff like that. So I realized as a kid that by socializing with them, I can have access to certain things. I think that began to clear my mind a little bit in terms of thinking about problem solving mechanically. And then I say, like, you know what, I want to learn about the Bible. And then when I begin to read the Bible, that's like I learned French with my friends who went to school, but I didn't go to school myself when I was a kid. And I stumbled on Genesis 16:16, where the story is Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. Abraham, getting old, his wife says, hey, we don't have a baby. Why don't you sleep with this slave girl? Maybe she can give us a kid. Okay, who wouldn't want to do that, right? Like God's friend, he like a screw up with a young girl and a slave at the time too. So Hagar is now pregnant. The tension between her and Sarah begins tense. Sarah is mistreating her, and she ran away from the home. And outside, the angel Gabriel come to her. Hey, Hagar, where are you going? You can check this on your phone, right? It's in Genesis. It's like a black and white on it. She said, I'm running away from my mistress. And the angel says, return home and submit yourself to your mistress. God has listened to your affliction. He will give you a son named Ishmael. He will multiply his descendants at that count. But the angel added that he will live like a wild donkey. His hands against everyone and everyone's hand against him. I was like, hold on one second. Is this a special envoy from a God cursing an unborn child? And someone tell me about free will. What will that kid be if he's pre-cursed? Not even cursed, but he's cursed before he's even here. And I just started revolting. And I realized that Ishmael in the Bible is the same Ishmael in the Quran, but a wash and clean one. Like in the Bible, he's the bad guy, like a son of a wah. And in the Quran, he's the symbol of Abraham's friendship with God. So you will see that Christians celebrate Abraham sacrificing one of his kids to God. For Christians, that's Isaac. It's not Ishmael, because Ishmael is the son of an unplanned plan of God. But for Islam, people literally travel to Saudi Arabia every year to the pilgrimage in celebration of Abraham killing Ishmael for God. So which one is it? So my answer was, you know what? I'm not a Jew. I'm not an Arabic. I'm out. And but it was hard. So I kept it inside, revolting against it, until I met this apostate, the Clergy project. And I finally begin to have because I just don't like to complain. When I complain about something, my motto is I have to do something about it. So from my complaint to joining TCP, I asked the president to assign me a task. So right now I'm the TCP's treasurer. If you want to be friend to someone with the TCP, it's me. I'm the money guy. Anyway, that's the reason why I got out. It's like just a national story, and it's unfair from my mom's situation to the whole story of how Ishmael, and basically Ishmael is the fracture point between Christianity and Islam. That's the way behind the door. That's why they get the two split up. And then you get the story of Jesus.
So you can admit there's problems with interpreting the various scriptures, but how do those problems lead to there's no God?
Okay, well, here's the thing. If you install the mosquito nest properly, you get to avoid malaria. Okay, then I begin to think about solving problems mechanically. If I don't want to be late, I have to wake up early. If you want to avoid polio, you have to vaccinate against polio. COVID, go get vaccine. So I look at anything in this life, you can technically think of a way to solve it. If that is the case, there is no possibility for God to be there. Otherwise, he will be a bad engineer. We can hack him all the time. Yeah.
So Duane, as a Pentecostal, you really, really did believe you felt the Holy Spirit.
Oh, yeah. You interrupted me. I was really totally into what Mohamed was saying. Okay, so now, yeah, I believed it 100%.
So why did you change?
Well, it took a while because, I'm a bit, us older folks, a little thick. Most of my ministry career was okay, but and I was also a pretty good apologist. I won't say I didn't debate and argue, but when agnostics asked me questions that they thought were challenging, I was always able to put them in a position where they had no more questions. So that's pretty cool. There's enough to look back on. I did have a lot of problems and doubts, but ultimately what got me is the behavior of other Christians, and the stupid things they would say. For example, someone says, God healed me of back problem, and there's no record of them ever having had a back problem, but they'll stand up there and say it. Well, I got very sick. Right around 2000, 2001, I was on a preaching tour. I was in Trinidad. This turns out to be the last time I went out. Am I boring you, buddy?
No, it's great.
I've seen lawn here. Anyway, so I was in Trinidad and I was touring the country. And I was good in one, and the next one I was okay. And then by the time I got down south to Rio Claro, what an awkward name. Rio Claro, by the way, means like clear river or something like that. And this river run through town was so dark you couldn't see your hand if you're stuck in it. There was alligators in that river too, so you wouldn't want to stick your hand in. But anyway, I was in Rio Claro and I was preaching. I couldn't even stand up. I actually had to sit down for the last two meetings I had there. And I came back to Toronto, didn't know what was wrong. It took them 11 months to find out what was wrong with me. I had hepatitis C and I was chronic, and I was ultimately the hepatologist told me that we narrowed it down. I was infected in 1978. So this is now 2001 or something like that. And ultimately it turned out I was one of the oldest living survivors of hep C that had been, in fact, nobody was still alive who was infected as long as I. So, okay, never mind that. Get back to that. There was a guy in Trinidad. He's a big shot there. And, he would bring me in. He brought Benny Hinn in, and he's well known. He's got radio shows all over the country. And I'd been on the radio in Trinidad for like a month. And he had relatives in Toronto who I was friends with. And one day I was at their house and my diagnosis had come out. And we were at the front door at his sister-in-law's house. And he said to me, basically, I was sick because I didn't have enough faith. Now, today, I'd probably threaten to slap somebody, but, I'm still a Christian. I'm going to do a slow burn instead of smacking somebody. And then he told me the most asinine, ridiculous story. When he was a boy in Trinidad, he was going out to play in the cane field and he broke his ankle and he just couldn't walk. And he prayed and he prayed and he started to force himself to walk. And by the time he got home, his ankle was healed. Okay, anybody? Come on.
Miracle.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because there was an x-ray machine in the cane field. And the doctors were right there. And boy, they knew what are we going to do? Because, come on, get serious. So that was the thin end of the wedge. I was treated very badly because I was sick. Now, I'd already gone through it because I was a divorced father, single father, and everywhere I went, I took my children with me. And, some places I was celebrated and some places I was like, so, okay, we had a lot of issues, but that was the one. I thought about it. I started to think about how people were treated. One thing that always irritated me was the way churches treated the LGBTQ, whatever, the alphabet community. Because These are sinners, but you don't want them in the church? Well, hang on a minute. Isn't that what we're all about? And these things really irritated me. I didn't really take enough time to process it. But the more I was sick, I couldn't get off the couch. And I had been, I wouldn't say famous, but I was well known enough so that people would meet my mother, and she was bragging probably. And people was, some people I'd never even heard of would say to her, I was best friends with Duane. Wow, we went to school, we did this together. I'd say, she'd call me and say she'd met over. I'd never heard of the person. Okay. So when you're riding high and you're conquering the world in the name of Jesus, everybody wants on your bandwagon. But if you get sick and you don't have enough faith, now nobody wants to talk to you. Is that, can I hear an amen?
Amen.
That's right.
Amen.
So
Preach it.
that was it. Then through another series of events that were beyond my control, and I had to shut my business down. I was running a business here which financed everything I did, because I was dealing with people who are poor. They're not going to pay me. I mean, if I went to Trinidad, it would cost me $1,500-$1,600 to get there, and they'd pass the plate for a week, and I'd come up with like $200 Canadian at the end of it. So I was paying for everything. Series of events. I ended up homeless for about 8 months. I've got 2 children, 15 and 13, my daughters, and we ended up living in a tent. Okay, I'm not kidding. So, never, and people who had been, who I had been friends with, other ministers, I was given a place to live with my children, and it was like a broom closet expanded. There was enough room on the floor to put an inflatable mattress, and the girls could sleep there, but I had to sleep sitting up in a plastic chair, wearing my coat because I didn't have blankets. Okay, now I could get into details there, but the way people treated me when I got in that position was, it started to really, really smolder inside of me. So in 2005, I had 2 sets of credentials. One was for pastoral counseling. They expired in October 2005. Now, never mind the fact I had only gotten off the street in August of that year. I really wasn't interested in focusing on that. I let them expire, didn't renew them. My ministerial credentials expired in March of 2006, and I let them slide too. Now I was angry. I didn't know what I believed at that point, but it took a while to unwind and to put my life back together. And I did quite a good job by the way. By the way, funny miracle. Once you stop giving 90% of what you make away to the church and the God that doesn't exist, all of a sudden you're doing pretty good. So anyway, I just focused. I started a business, and I just moved on. I didn't realize how angry I was about that whole thing until after I joined the Clergy Project. And I waited till 2017 for some reason. I knew about it in 2011. And I had already been up for a number of years. I didn't apply. I didn't think I needed it. But this turns out to be something that is necessary for my mental health and helping me to place myself more in today's society. I'm going to stop talking because you got more questions.
Well, it sounds like your faith just kind of dwindled away then because of so many.
I would say it got
failures of
beaten
prayer.
out of me.
Beaten out of me.
Yeah. I had so many questions. One thing, and I won't take up. Okay. In church, the biggest sins you can commit are sexual and getting divorced. Someone, we were talking to some and said, what you can do instead of divorcing someone, if you're a Christian, instead of divorcing your wife, if you want to stay in good stead with the church, what you should do is get a gun and shoot your spouse, because you can get forgiven for that. You'll go to jail, you get out, you'll write a book, you go on a speaking tour, Now you're a star. And look what God has done to restore this terrible thing that this person's done, right? But if you divorce, you're done. What? How sensible is that? That doesn't make any
Quick
sense. at all.
note, we are not endorsing this strategy.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I mean, I was talking to a rabbi once, friend of mine, and he said, not Shlomo. He's my friend too, aren't you? Say yes. That's the right. So, and we were talking about marrying people and getting divorced. And I said to this guy, Michael, I said, you know what? How many times have you been there marrying somebody and you say what God puts together? And can you imagine God's in heaven say, no, I have nothing to do with this. And so this is the whole divorce thing. And all of this stuff went together to make you say, this is nonsense. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you.
Unless
So,
you want me to talk.
we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
You can tell these people used to be preachers.
Mhm.
We love to talk. Lon, you were a Wesleyan minister and you say you believed it. So why did you change your mind? Why did you come to this conclusion that there's no supernatural world?
Well, as I mentioned, it was just my default position. Of course, there was a God. That's what my pastors had taught me, and that's what my parents had taught me. And I was inclined to believe them for some strange reason, but I knew there were problems. And see, everybody who starts training for religious leadership in whatever religion it is, they have doubts. But we hope when we get our education that our questions will be answered, or we'll meet somebody, some professor, somebody really, really smart. He's going to answer our questions. By the time I get done with all these courses, I'm going to understand the Bible and what's so difficult to understand. And but then it turned out that, of course, that never happens, and we tend to finish our ministerial training with even more doubts. But now we're invested and we got to proceed. So I knew there were problems with the Bible, things that didn't make sense in my little mind, and nobody came along to answer all those questions. And I was in a position in Japan back on my secular job and observing the people in the Japanese society and reading Dawkins and Hitchens, and decided, well, maybe there is no God. And I went with that the next day. I'm going to be an atheist from now on, starting tomorrow. And of course, if it doesn't go well, I can always repent of that, I suppose. And I just want to say that I love these guys, not just these two, the whole bunch of them. My arms aren't that long. And they're all really, really amazing, have amazing stories, speak several languages, and I think that's cool. Mohamed, he'll be talking to Arabic to a total stranger. He talks to everyone he runs into, and that's just amazing. But I want to say my second language is English, and my third language is Spanish. I know some Spanish. Spent a year in Mexico, and I'm starting to learn a little bit of Canadian. And I really don't have a first language. I'm not proficient in any of it.
So in your case, was it a deliberate decision to say no?
So at that point, it was a deliberate decision because I had left the pulpit 6 years earlier. The process to become ordained or eligible for ordination in the Wesleyan Church takes 7 years. I did all my studies in the required amount of time, got excellent grades, and still the denomination kept having me jump through more hoops. So 10 years into a 7-year process, it was obvious to me that they weren't going to ordain me. They said, well, what's your plans for this year? Well, my plans are you're going to ordain me, and I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and get better at it, and it's all cool. But obviously it wasn't, and they said, we can't ordain you because you're serving another denomination. Well, they approved me serving a couple of small Methodist churches because we're so close. And so the chairman of the board of ministerial development said to the assistant superintendent, he said, find in the discipline where it says we can't ordain Lon because he's serving another denomination, even though we licensed him to. And he's flipping through the pages trying to find it. And I'm thinking, it's not there. I knew that book better than they did. I knew the Bible better than they did, probably, but I've forgotten most of it now. I'm trying to do that intentionally. And Yeah, and then the divorce thing. So I spent 10 years preparing for ministry because the guy up there, that's what he wants me to do. It was obvious it wasn't happening. And we were at that meeting and the guy couldn't find in the discipline. And I said, and I'm there with my wife, and I said, well, people, I looked at my wife and we stood up and I said, I want you to know that we have always loved and respected you people. And we still love you. And we walked out. And that was that. Now, why wouldn't they ordain me? Well, see, I talked to an older Wesleyan pastor, and he said, well, we've never actually ordained anyone who was divorced and remarried. And maybe we've never ordained a matrilineal Jew. And I said, would have been nice if somebody mentioned it about 10 years ago,
So this church was supposedly God's voice on earth. You just got dissatisfied with that whole process.
Well,
There couldn't be a God because this church was dysfunctional.
Well, I left the pulpit because they weren't going to ordain me. I left the pulpit to make a living. 6 years later, I'm in Japan. Oh, and I went to a Christian church in Japan a few times. I got in trouble there. I get in trouble a lot, Duane.
Yes, you do.
And
You would all the time.
yeah, I sat on the piano bench, and that was a very sacred bench, and you don't sit on the piano bench. And these Christians in Japan, they're just as bad as the ones I left back home. And then reading Hawkins and Hitchens said, oh, there's a possibility that there isn't any God. I think I'm going to go with that and try that out. Yes, that was very much a decision.
Okay, so John, you were obviously a true believer, but something happened. I want to know, like, philosophically, or was it hypocrisy? What was the reasons why you changed your mind?
Within TCP and within like the whole community of atheists who used to be religious, you hear a lot of stories about people who were rejected because of anger, being treated badly, pain, family members or loved ones dying, despite praying hard for them, things like this, rebellion, whatever. My journey to atheism, I was actually a very, very reluctant atheist. I did not want to reject my beliefs. I fought against it for a long time. Like Lon, and like a lot of us, it started at Bible college. Before Bible college, I knew what I believed. If you ask me why, well, that's because what my parents taught me. When I went to Bible college and started learning all the theology and reading the Bible from cover to cover and the church history and all that, I started spotting more and more problems. But that wasn't causing me to doubt. At that point, I simply thought, well, this is just because I don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough faith. I need to study more and I need to pray more to the Holy Spirit to reveal the truth to me. And that was my attitude. I went to the mission field, still devout believer, but the problems were not getting lesser as I prayed and learned more. They were increasing. So part of it was intellectual. I think the biggest factor for me was, like, in Canada, I was surrounded 99.9% of the time by other Christians. When I went to China, most of the people I was dealing with were Chinese, most of them were atheists. And then among the expat community, I had people from India who were Hindus. I made friends with Muslims. I was meeting people from all these different religions. And I started realizing that, like, the things that I founded, the proofs of my belief, Christian miracles were proof of my beliefs. Well, Hindus had miracles, Muslims had miracles, all these other religions had miracles, but that didn't prove their belief. We had answered prayer, that proved my belief. Well, Hindus had answered prayers and Muslims had, all these other groups have, but no, that doesn't prove their belief. And well, why? Well, on my side, it's because God answered it. But if it's somebody else, it wasn't really an answer to prayer, or it was Satan answering their prayer to make them think their belief is true, or it was never really answered. They're just imagining it, things like this. And I started realizing, like, it doesn't come down to this is a proof. It comes down to deciding first, this is my religion. And then whatever happens in that religion is proof of it. And whatever happens in another religion, there's no consistency. There's no objectivity to it. And I just simply could not hold that as proof, as evidence of my beliefs. And the moment that crumbled, pretty much everything else fell apart. And it was literally a one-day deconversion. One day I was a devout Christian evangelistic missionary. And the next day I literally, like I still remember it to this day, I just kind of woke up, was thinking about it. And I suddenly just realized I can't believe this anymore. And I was an atheist. And that would just, whatever that straw was on the camel's back, that was it.
So does it follow if all the religions are wrong that there's no God?
No, absolutely not. It's, but there's always possible that one is wrong and one is right and everybody else is wrong. I have, since that time and looking at everything else, I have never seen any religion which has any defensible, objective evidence that holds it above any other religion. So, to add to this a little bit, my biggest concern when I became a atheist was how my parents would react. I was not concerned that they would reject me, but I did know that, first of all, they were going to blame themselves, particularly my mother. She was going to feel guilt. Must be their fault. They must have done something wrong. And B, it wasn't that they're going to reject me, but the news that I was an atheist would be the same as telling them that I had developed terminal cancer. It's a death sentence. Their beloved oldest son is going to hell. So when I talked, and it wasn't until 6 years later that I told them. I was in China, so it was easy to keep it covered up. But when I finally did tell them, first, I assured them it was nothing to do with them. It was a purely intellectual thing. It was based on the evidence. And second, I did tell them, this is evidence-based. If at some point in the future, there is greater evidence for the existence of the Christian God, and I would add to that now the evidence for any other God. If there were significant evidence greater than the evidence I have right now for a naturalist worldview, I would become a Christian or I would join that religion. I have simply never found such evidence and don't believe I ever will.
But in a minute, we'll hear what happened with your family. So
Yeah.
Great. So what's your story, Shlomo? You went through a radical transformation? Why?
So yeah, so to answer that, I'll just say a little bit about it. If people want to ask questions later, I'll elaborate. I would say like this is as a rabbi, I many times would counsel or ask people, or people explain to me, what does keep us religion? And I would say there's two things: is first of all our attachment to community, and second of all faith and belief. And those two pillars of religious affiliation kind of maintain us through different times. And for me, it's not being a source of joy or happiness or enrichment to my life to observe the very detailed and intricate and demanding Jewish rituals. And I wanted to say, and I want to fully acknowledge that for many people it is. And I recognize that for many people, the Jewish holidays, the detailed Jewish observances, all of the laws, it is a source of joy and meaning to them. And for people who find it that way, honestly, I wish them only happiness in that path. But for me, I don't know how much people are familiar with Jewish observance, but the constant prayers and the constant laws, to me, it became a burden rather than a source of joy, and something that I realized was not adding to my life. It was in fact detracting from it. That's number one. And then number two, in terms of faith and belief, I have to say, I think that the reason for me is similar to what John was describing just a moment ago. The realization that for me to maintain the belief that I'm right and my religious beliefs are right means believing that everybody else is wrong. And to go around believing that I'm right and believing that everybody else is wrong is really a very burdensome way to live, very difficult way to live. And in particular, specifically with regards to being a rabbi, that the job of a rabbi is to be someone who knows, someone who can answer questions. You say, Rabbi, I have a question. What happens to us in the afterlife? What do I do if my dishes get mixed up in the dishwasher, the meat and the milk? What do I do if on the Sabbath my pot goes out or the electricity? And the rabbi knows, the rabbi's paid to have an answer to all this kind of stuff. And I found that to be a very big burden. And I got to the point where I wanted to be able to say legitimately, I really don't know. I really don't know the answer to all this. And so now if I don't know, I shouldn't be the rabbi anymore. I'm just going to add a few more thoughts about why stopping with faith and belief, because to be honest, it's more than that as well, to speak for a moment or two. I think was the realization that these beliefs often, well, I say again, I think for many people, they are legitimately a source of joy and happiness. Through the realization these beliefs often also, or at least sometimes, do harm as well. And as a rabbi, my job of sort of expounding and promoting these beliefs is sometimes doing harm. And that can be on a practical level sometimes when a person's personal ambitions or desires clash with religious observance. It can be practical. Someone wants to do a job or work in a career that conflicts, let's say, with observance of the Jewish Sabbath. And it's my job as a rabbi to convince them that the joy they will get from observing the Jewish Sabbath and the fulfillment they get from the Jewish Sabbath is, of course, greater than the fulfillment they would get by making those life decisions or taking that path. And who am I to know? Is that true? I don't know. That's something like that. Number one. I think sometimes ideologically, an important point for me, for example, is marriage. The Judaism has a very rigid conception of what marriage and relationships are. And to realize as a rabbi, your job is to promote that and to say, oh, you think you're happy in your relationship, but I'll tell you, you're fooling yourself. And really greater happiness is to be found in only this model. And the realization is, I don't believe that's true sometimes. And I'd rather not be saying that because I think it's a harmful belief. And then number three, and this is something I can elaborate on later if you want. Right now, I'm happy to say, I'm proud to say I'm a student at the University for Peace in Costa Rica, getting a degree in international law and human rights. And I think for me, a commitment to the human rights movement, which I really see as a key plank if we're going to build a more peaceful and happier world, and a realization that Orthodox Jewish values may at times be in keeping with that and may at times be at odds with a commitment to human rights values. And I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to examine that. I wanted to discuss that. And I felt as an Orthodox rabbi, you can't. You have to always defend Judaism, not be willing to acknowledge that there may be conflicts. So to have that fuller ability to have that discussion, I wanted to stop as well.
So it sounds like you're saying, first of all, that we just really don't know. But second of all, let's focus on this world.
Yes.
Rather than maybe something
Yes,
supernatural.
Yes.
So Mohamed, let's go to the follow-up. What happened? How did you get out of it? And did you land on your feet? And for all of you, maybe you could just sort of brief us what happened after you came out of your beliefs.
Well, I had a chance to come to the United States in 2010 and decided to pursue some sort of education. I learned English and then get psychology 101 class. Well, I remember when I was about 7 years old, my mom had a breakdown, mental breakdown. We treated her with exorcism and, cast the devils out of her. And in the Quran, there is a specific chapter dedicated to that. It's called Surah Al-Jinn. For those who know the Quran, you will know that Surah Al-Jinn is used specifically to process devils out of people. Well, at the time, my mom was, she was beaten up and tied up and isolated and blah, blah, blah. And in my Psychology 101 class, I get to learn about ego, superego, Freudian theories and what happened to the brain and when this. I get out of the class and I asked one of my aunt who was a little bit educated, say, can I ask you a question? Say yes. What was happening to my mom when I was 7 years old? He said, well, your mom was really depressed because of so much trauma she's gone through. From being married at 13 years old, having 2 kids before 14 years old, and lost 1 kid and lost marriage, she couldn't process it. I said, so what did you do to help her? I said, well, I had to lie to your grandpa with a thermometer. Went there and I lied to them that she has a high fever. She just needs to take malaria medication. And when I brought her to the hospital, we gave her sleep medication. She slept for a long time and she began to be normal. I said, so that would be basic psych treatment, right? You say, yes. I say, so then Surah Al-Jinn in the Quran is a false treatment. You say, I don't want to touch that. So to stick to the mechanism of life, right? I realize that anywhere you can plug in 1 + 1 = 2, God is useless. If you could sit down to think about this cup and what makes this water pour into it, then there is no need for God to put water in. I think for a long period of time, we were cultivated in giving up our ability to think and to let God do the job. I couldn't take that. And as I begin to mechanically resolve issues, people think like I was thinking I'm better than everybody. I say, no, I just want to know how to organize myself. When I decided not to do it anymore, my mom, it's a funny story. I'm in Alaska in 2017 when I joined TCP. My mom come to visit me and it's Ramadan. And Ramadan Muslim, fasting time. And in the Quran, specifically, it says you eat at the sunrise and you stop the fasting at the sunset. Well, in Alaska, during summertime, where it was Ramadan, the sun doesn't set. So my mom is in my house. I work at the airport. I come home at 11:30 p.m. My mom is sitting at the dining table. Like, hey, mom, not going to bed? I said, no, I'm sitting here waiting for the sun to set so I can stop fasting. I said, oh. I said, Mom, I'm sorry. This is Alaska. The sun doesn't set. I'm like, what the heck is that? That is not possible. America has conspired to keep the sun up so Muslims wouldn't be able to exercise their faith. I hold my hands like, this is conspiracy. This is like a university size of conspiracy. And I say to my mom, I say, well, it's not, the sun is too big. No one can set it up anyway not to set. It's just that at the time when they wrote the Quran, they didn't know that the earth was round, that's one. And they didn't know that there would be a place where the sun would be. And I realized that, oh no, hold on, I'm talking to someone who doesn't know what geography means. So I say, well, Mom, it's okay, it's gonna be all right. Just, you can eat and go to bed. She said, no, she's not staying in Alaska. So for that reason, me, my wife, my children, she doesn't want to have to do anything with us. As Jesus says in the Bible, I've not come to bring peace, I've come to have man against his son, a daughter against his mother, a mother against his, like it just turns to be, I'm this wonderful son of my mom. First one, the one who got her out of every single misery that she have known. But simply because I'm married to a woman that is not Muslim, I'm in a place where the sun doesn't set. She doesn't want to do anything with me, with my children. It's over. And she gets support from her family.
So briefly, what does your family think about your lack of belief now? Are they shunning you or are they accepting you as a family member?
They shunned me in the beginning, but when I started to talk from a supportive perspective, because I realized that communication is also the biggest issue in this relationship. If I try to tell them that they were wrong, then I'm the bad guy. But if I keep calm and show them that despite my difference, I'm there for them, there will be few people who will finally say, you know what, we might not like the way he lives, but he's more reasonable than we are. So there's still some of them, those who from perhaps same generation, they didn't get that much opportunity like I had by coming to America and stuff like that. They will still be jealous and claim that I'm godless. But during COVID time, when everything was locked down, I'm the one who was providing money for community events. When someone was sick, I'm the one who was funding for the person to go to the hospital. And for Eids and holidays, I'm the one who was spending money to buy sheep and stuff. And I don't do it to claim anything. Sometimes I don't even do it without anybody knowing. And during an event, I actually associate TCP with that. They had a big event during COVID time and there was no money. And I provided a massive support. And an uncle of mine in town came and took the microphone and said, guys, you know what? I feel ashamed. We all bash this guy. We hate him. But I tell you what, without him, we wouldn't be sitting here. I don't care wherever he's getting his money from. If he thinks about his family, I think he's my nephew. And so I don't feel their hatred toward me again anymore. I just feel like they probably don't know what I know. Like I don't know what you think. Like I don't know what you're thinking. And I have no reason of thinking like you thinking someone, so something that I don't know. So yeah, they're still zealous, angry guys, but that's the essence of life. We are these social animals. We hate each other, but it's just pure psychological and social mechanism of life. So I don't take it bad anymore because now I'm infected with a reasoning virus. So I take it very logically. Yeah.
Well, I think it's catching too.
That's right. That's right.
So Duane, what happened after you? What happened with your life? Did you land on your feet?
Yeah. Oh, I'm so lucky. You know, first of all, I didn't do a lot of pastoring. And the last time I did, a deacon who didn't like me had my house burglarized. Never mind. But because I had the business, or business knowledge, I was able to basically walk away from it and just continue with my life. Now, when I really walked away, I was homeless, as I said. And this was 2005. And in spite of the fact that I was homeless, I managed to pull some connections. I had a property management business. I had temporary help agency. I had a construction company. Well, I found an old apartment. A landlord called me, so we made a deal over the phone. I had some answers for his questions. He bought a building I used to manage, and I knew all the answers. So I said, by the way, I need a place to stay. So he put me in there. Good. Then by the end of the year, I managed to buy a business, an existing business with, made a deal. Didn't have any money, but I made a deal. And then acquired another business, and off I went. So I was lucky, very, very lucky. Had I been in the position of pastoring a church, I would have been in big, big trouble. The other thing I'm grateful for is being Canadian, because in Canada's not really that religious a country. We don't get all freaked out about what you're doing, for the most part. So nobody in my family really cared. So it was fairly easy for me to walk away. Yeah, and that's it in a nutshell. That's my Wesleyan sermon instead of my Pentecostal version.
Way to go.
Did I do good?
Yeah.
So you're up, Lon.
Okay, what's the question again? I think I jumped ahead. I'm always out of order. I'm sorry. So the question specifically right now is.
So after you abandoned your belief in the supernatural and you stopped the ministry, what happened with your life and your family? And
okay, so personally, once I went atheist, no regrets. It was liberating. It was wonderful. All of a sudden, everything makes sense. But my wife wasn't particularly happy and still is not. She still considers herself a believer. And so she's had a difficult time, but we're still together. We still get along fairly well. I don't pontificate on religion, right? And that's not going to work. And we're going to be celebrating our 45th wedding anniversary. Or maybe we already did. Yeah, last December was 45. I think 46 coming up. What do you think? You keeping track of this?
I think you got to pick. Makes women happy to keep track of these things. Like just a tip.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, and it's my second marriage. And then I paused. Say I was married longer the first time, but anyways, yeah. So and affected our kids some because they were brought up in the church, because I didn't know any better but to do that. So, but they're doing all right. Our older son was very involved in the church. He was youth leader. He had a bit of a falling out in the church, and now he doesn't go. And my granddaughter tells me that from time to time they say, we ought to go visit such and such a church, but she says, Grandpa, they never do. So that's kind of interesting. And our younger son married a very outspoken atheist feminist young lady. Oh, she's a pastafarian too. Yeah. So she's A-okay. So there.
So you didn't have a struggle finding new employment after?
No, because I just went back to industry. Yeah.
So what about you, John D?
For me, I think that part of my transition was easier than a lot of other TCP members. Since, as I said, I couldn't go to China officially as a missionary. I went there as an English teacher. So when I rejected Christianity, I still had a job. I could still teach. However, like I said, I went to China in 93. 5 years later, around 98, 99, I rejected my beliefs. I didn't leave China. I ended up staying in China for a quarter of a century. I just came back to Canada in 2019. So effectively, almost my entire adult life was in China. Post-university was in China. Met my wife there. So when I rejected it, A, I didn't lose my job. B, I wasn't married, so I didn't have to worry about dealing with wife, children, which is, so a lot of those issues weren't really issues for me. As I was sharing at lunch with the guys here, one thing that I do find rather interesting coming back here, I am fairly unique among white atheists in that my entire atheist experience was in an atheist country. China, majority of the population are atheists. China really doesn't have, like in the US, you've got American atheists. China doesn't have China atheists because there's no need. You don't really have atheist organizations as such. You have like the Communist Party is atheist, but it's not an atheist organization. Yeah. Even among religious Chinese, telling them that I'm an atheist, there's no big reaction because, well, of course you are. Most people are. It's the norm. So coming back to North America is actually, I think the biggest culture shock for me is the reaction that I've had to learn to be careful. I have my own business. I do corporate consulting. I have to be careful not to mention to some clients that I'm an atheist because they may not hire me. I remember in 2009, I was a speaker at the American Atheist National Conference then. And we were in a big hotel. There were other conferences going on. Get in an elevator and I've got a lanyard on. So there's another woman gets on. She's got a lanyard. They're different colors. We're at different conferences. Mine isn't really obvious. So she asked me, well, what are you here for? I said, oh, I'm a speaker at the American Atheist Conference. And she gets this horrified look on her face, like backs up right against the back of the elevator, back against the wall, staring at me in literal horror. And when the door opens up, she like edges out, keeping her back to me the whole time. And I had been an atheist at this point for almost a decade. And this is the first time I'd ever had a reaction like that. So anyway, it does give me a very unique, compared with most Westerners, particularly people that are coming out of a religious background into atheism. It gives me a very, very different, very unique perspective on atheism. But I should quickly say to finish up the question, when I became an atheist, first I did teaching for a little bit, but then I moved into business. By this point, I had a lot of experience with the Chinese culture, and culture is my passion. I'm a cultural chameleon. I've always had a natural ability to understand and adapt to different cultures. It's like by 98, 99, that's when China was opening up and all these foreign companies were coming into China with foreign managers who didn't have the slightest clue how to work in China. So I just started a consulting company, training all these international companies how to work in China. Ended up starting 3 companies in China. I've started up my fourth company here in Canada. So all in the corporate consulting sector. So that's pretty much my life today. And then on the side, of course, director of CFI in Vancouver, on the board of directors of the Clergy Project. So got my fingers in a lot of different pies.
So Shlomo, was it hard to move from being a rabbi into secular social justice work?
Right, so a few comments on that, a few thoughts on that. I think for me, my experience of leaving the rabbinate was different than many others in Clergy Project. To me, I viewed resigning as almost an act of respect for the congregation. Meaning, say like this, they deserve a rabbi who is truly a believer. That's what they deserve. That's what they're paying for. They deserve a rabbi who truly is a believer in that religion, and truly wants to promote it, and truly wants to grow the congregation. And I recognize, look, I'm not doing good at that. I don't have that desire to grow, to pull people into the congregation. I don't, and you can see I'm not passionate about pulling people into the religious observance, and and that's what they deserve. And so look, and I want to say I still have a positive view for that. I mean, for people I want them, the congregants that find that observance to be a meaningful part of their life and find it to be enriching. I want them to have that. I want them to be successful in that, and I want them to have the religious leadership that they need to be happy in those choices that they've made. When I resigned, I helped them as best I could to find a new rabbi. Even after they had the new rabbi, I offered to help him as much as I could, be it practical things in the office, be it questions about the community, whatever I could do to help. And I think that that's helped to ease into what's become a comfortable transition with the congregation. And also, this is a very touchy topic, let's say, in the community, but I did what I could. I definitely didn't want to do anything that would be embarrassing to the congregation. I wanted to be respectful as much as I could. I mean, I wouldn't go out and do something which is publicly very much unbecoming for the Jewish faith, as much as, although part of it, I also wanted to be able to live my own life. And I admit there's a little tension there, but I wanted to be as respectful, let's say, as I could. So, but I think that led for me to what became a rather comfortable social relationship with the congregation. We still were friends, and we had those personal relationships you have after a long time in the synagogue. So, all right. So I'm very grateful to them that they allowed me to maintain that. I think one of the things that I felt afterwards, one of the more difficult things that I realized afterwards, is I missed the religious community. Meaning it's real hard to find community sometimes. This is something we talk about all the time. It's real hard to find community outside of religion sometimes. Some people get a sense of community through work, sometimes through other activities. But if you don't have that, you miss that. And I don't think I realized how important that sense of community was to me in my life until it was missing. And it was hard to replace. Let's just say that as a comment. And the other thing I'll say is, luckily, I don't know how else to put it. Luckily, in my case, some people talk about, as you mentioned, Lon, your wife, or mention other things with family. In terms of my wife and my children, my wife at that time, we all kind of went in the same direction. Mm-hmm. I think that everyone in the family had some real difficulties with religious observance. I think that the kids had some real hard times with the school. They'd gone to an Orthodox day school. I think they were very hurt by some of the religious treatment they received there. I think my former spouse, Noah, she had some issues with the Jewish community. So we all ended up moving in the same direction. So fortunately, just by luck, there wasn't that type of family friction that so often plagues these things as well. So I'm fortunate for that. So I feel very, very fortunate that I've been able to have a relatively smooth.
So what's the answer?
Sorry, just a second. I just want to add here very quickly. One of the reasons I'm really, really happy and I want to have Shlomo here was not just to have the Jewish perspective get more diversity, but also because of what he just said, that we tend to hear a lot of stories about people that have had bad experiences and no longer have relationships. And when he and I are talking about this, he expressly talked about this, that he still has that close connection and community with that group. And so I really want to know that among TCP, we really do have a wide range of experiences and approaches and relationships and everything like that. So
we didn't manage to get a Catholic priest in here today, but there's a lot of Catholic priests and monks and some nuns in the group as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But just quickly, what answer? Do you need 2 dishwashers to separate the milk and the meat, or how do you do it?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can't put milk and meat in the same
Okay.
dishwasher. It's a rabbi. You have to know. The question is, what do you do if you do have a meat and a milk dish in the same dishwasher at the same time? Then what happens? You have to ask the rabbi, and the rabbi.
So what happens?
You bring them in the same
There you go. Okay, here's some scholarship. That's a potential answer. 1 year buried in the sand. That is a potential answer, depending what the dish is made of. No, that's a different ritual, but time for that too. There's time to put dishes into the water. That's true too.
So before questions, you wanted to take a little break or should we?
Yeah, we're gonna take just particularly for the panel, we're gonna take probably 5 to 10 minutes, let's say 10 minutes. Everybody here, you can kind of walk around, talk. The people who are on Zoom, you can take a break whenever you want. Just be back in 10 minutes and we'll be doing Q&A. For the Q&A, like I said, we'll be taking questions both from our live audience here and from our Zoom audience. Shiana, who is our CFI coordinator, she's been, I hope, tracking all the questions, and she can highlight some of the questions that she thinks are most important to ask the panel. I'd also like to encourage everybody, do ask Dan some questions as well. He's hasn't had much chance to tell his story, so if you want to ask him a bit as well, you can. This is his chance to talk a bit too. So yeah, 10 minutes and we'll be back.
Water back there.
So welcome back, everyone. And we're going to start with questions that have come from the chat. I'm hoping we'll be able to get them to them all. So the first question we have is, I would like to know if those that leave have the opportunity to share why they leave with their church members, or are lies being told to them by those in power? When they say told to them, that would be told to the former congregants. Yeah, we need to unmute the other computer.
Yeah, okay. You hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. For me, that was one of the most difficult parts of my journey. Being a missionary in China, you have to keep in mind the Chinese that I was working with, for them to become Christians, it was illegal. They were facing loss of jobs, imprisonment, torture, all sorts of different, very, very serious penalties. And I was telling them it's worth it because you're trading temporary suffering on earth for an eternity in paradise rather than eternity in hell. And so these are people, like particularly enjoying the underground churches, these are people who are literally risking their lives and their freedom to follow what I'm telling them. And when I became an atheist and rejected it all, to have to go back to those people and tell them, hey guys, you know, this isn't the exact way I said it, but effectively the message is, hey guys, I'm sorry, everything I told you was bullshit and you've risked your lives for nothing. It was extremely difficult. I did go back and talk to them, but they effectively severed all ties with me. I didn't even really get a choice in it. There was, from various people, there was anger, feelings of betrayal. There were no good reactions from any of them at all. Mohamed?
Well, I think the question itself, to me, is the reason why this type of event is important, right? One thing is for you to share what you feel. Another thing is for you to expect people to have certain reaction. When I make my change, I make it for me, and I try to make it for good. So whatever reaction people have, I just want to make sure I don't do anything harmful to them. For instance, when my older brother, oh, that's a fun thing, actually. There is a Jesus in Ivory Coast. So if you guys want to be saved, you need to come see me after this event.
Sorry, people are saying they can't hear.
Oh,
It's too soft or they can't hear it at all.
No, they can't hear.
They've those before.
can't hear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think they're saying they can hear now.
Thank you.
Okay. So my older brother with same father. He is the vice president of our local Jesus, but he's a Muslim. This gentleman woke up one day and he says that Jesus was supposed to come back as a Muslim, because in the Quran, Jesus was not crucified. No, in the Quran, Jesus was not crucified. God just faked it to the prosecutors. So Jesus just went to the sky and he's gonna come back. So he is the Jesus, and my brother is his vice president. They called me because, you know, I have a little bit of I'm famous in my town. So they wanted me to be youth organizer. And I told them, like, it's just, I just don't think it's true. And my brother was really upset. I said, okay, let me take it back. It's not like it's not true. I just don't feel like doing that, because I want to learn math. I want to learn physics. I want to learn science. And I wouldn't have time for this. So please don't take it bad. It's going to be okay. He didn't like it, but his children, I'm the one who now helping them with their algebra, with their mathematics. I help them go to school. But even though he knows that we're now on the same platform, but I build a common interest with him. By helping his children, by participating in the community, now we're doing good. So the reaction or telling the truth is just subjective of who you telling to and when you telling it to. But if you plug it into some realities on the ground, I think it gives different perspective. Any other question, or somebody else want to add?
I can answer the question. I was an associate pastor in 3 different California churches, where I did all the pastoral things, preached and visited the sick people in the hospital and did all that and led the choir. But I felt my calling was evangelism. So I left the local church ministry and I spent 8 years preaching the end of the world from church to church. And I spent a couple of years in Mexico. So when I became an atheist, I was not actually a pastor in the pulpit. I was still a minister. I was still living the life as an evangelist. So I didn't have to stand up in the pulpit and say, hey, everybody, this is wrong. I wish I could have. That would have been dramatic. But what I did was I just sent a letter to everybody. I sent out a letter to co-pastors, former churches, co-missionaries. I had a lot of music that was being published, so Christian publishers. And I just sent out a 1-page letter explaining I don't believe anymore. I want you to know, let's talk about this. If you don't invite me to preach again, unless I'll come if you want to hear a different kind of sermon. But so I was pretty open about it, and the reactions were everything. I got some wonderful, loving, warm reactions from Christian friends who are still friends today. And I got some surprisingly ugly, hateful responses from people that I thought were good friends, but who just could not handle it. So I figured integrity has its price, and I'm just going to let the chips fall where they may, and they did.
Okay, Shauna, I think next question.
Okay,
Well, actually, we have one from our in-person audience here.
Okay.
Take that one.
Hi. Can you online hear me?
Well, I'll re-ask the
Okay,
question.
sure.
Yeah.
So have you, now that you're no longer practicing your religion, now that you no longer believe in your religion, are you still practicing your religion at all? Any rituals that give you comfort? Anything that you'd like to do that reminds you of
Who you used to be?
Exactly.
Okay, so
Hands before I eat, that's.
right. Okay, so the question was, now that we have rejected our religion, do any of us still keep any of the old routines, traditions, anything like that from that religion? For me, I can just quickly say no.
No, no way.
I do, but by a psychological block up in my head. Learn is making me bad. Now I'm breaking with some of their habits. For instance, as a Muslim, you don't eat pork, you don't drink alcohol, and stuff like that. So I was never a smoker.
Best part of deconversion is bacon.
That's right. So even though I quit the beliefs, I was really not capable of eating pork and touching alcohol. So as of right now, I don't drink, but I just decided one time I want to just taste how does it feel like, and it was nasty. So I don't drink anymore, but no longer because of religion like it used to be, because I break it, right? The Quran says anything that can make you drink at a big quantity, the small quantity is haram. So I was not even supposed to even touch, but I think I break that barrier. Now, with regard to pork, it's only recently when I, again, break with multiple traditions and married that white woman in Alaska. She told me that the pork was nothing bad. Just give it a try. So she was, I guess, my Eve in heaven. So she let me taste the pork. Oh gosh, she was so good. So I don't willfully go to store to buy pork. No, not at all. But now and then when I'm with those apostates,
Yeah.
I just like to feel free by just eating pork. But my system just doesn't take it as a food.
We're working on the wine though.
Yeah, yeah.
I would
We'll
try.
get you there. You know, gotta be careful because love can make you drunk too.
Oh my God.
So, okay,
Shlomo, give an answer to that.
Yeah.
Maybe my answer is probably different than others. I'm gonna answer yes. I do observe some of the Jewish rituals. Maybe there was a time that I took, like, because always when you talk about relationships, when you end a relationship, sometimes you go through a little period where you break apart, then later on maybe you can become friends. I would say something like that maybe for me, and I'll tell you why. To me, I will say I think some Jewish rituals are inspirational, or can be to some people. It sometimes can be inspirational, can be very meaningful. I'll tell you also, I find some Jewish rituals to be not inspirational, sometimes to be hurtful even, and sometimes to be very hard to come to grips with. I think the difficulty as a religious person, particularly as a rabbi, is it is your job to defend everything and to do everything. And if someone comes and says, this ritual, I think it's boring, I think it's bad, I think it's indefensible, the job of the rabbi is to say, well, let me show you why you're wrong. And really, if you would think deeper, you would realize why this is good, it is inspiring, and you know how I can forget it. And you know what I can do is pick and choose. And so I would say relatively small, but the relatively small percentages of Jewish rituals that when and if I decide I would like to do it, either for nostalgic reasons or personal reasons or family reasons, then I'm happy to do it. And what I choose not to do, I won't. The majority, which I choose not to do, I won't do. And I find for that, my relationship with the Jewish rituals has actually improved.
And I just want to reply very quickly to one of the comments here from Mason. I think Mason is another TCP member. I think it needs to be pointed out how difficult the transition is for many of TCP's members, especially fundamentalists. So far, it sounds too easy. And yeah, the panel that we have up here,
We're the lucky ones.
yeah, it wasn't as traumatic. There was trauma, certainly. It wasn't as traumatic. There are other people that, like, we have members who are facing drug addiction, alcoholism, wanting to commit suicide, tremendous depression, complete loss of family, loss of job, loss of home. So yes, it absolutely, we are not, among five of us here, we are not in any way representative of everyone in TCP. And there definitely are some much more traumatic stories of people who've gone through.
And the trauma is more evident in general among the more fundamentalist groups, definitely.
Would you please add to that what TCP does to help in that section?
Yeah, actually, there's a question coming up on
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Well, can I reply to his question?
Yeah.
Additionally.
Yeah.
For me, it was music, because I was a church musician and a Christian songwriter. And in fact, I'm still getting royalties today from some of that Christian music I wrote back in the
You should give that back.
Donate to a good cause.
Oh,
There you go.
okay,
There's not time to tell some of the stories, maybe later.
okay.
But the Freedom from Religion Foundation just started a project, which is one of the funnest things in my life. It's called Godless Gospel. And there's a number of former gospel musicians, as in Black gospel musicians, who are now atheists and agnostics. They've left the hypocrisy of that whole industry. Andre Forbes, who was a big gospel producer, songwriter, he and I wrote brand new songs in the gospel style. And if you want to have a fun experience, just go to YouTube and look up Godless Gospel Debuts, and you'll see the first ever music songs with that same gospel style, traditional and fun that you feel in church, that makes you want to get up and dance, but with totally secular, atheistic, humanistic lyrics.
May I expound on that?
Yeah.
It's a sort of connect, kind of get this guy involved. There was a question asked earlier by someone called the Afro-Atheist. Now, pay attention, the Afro-Atheist is a Black woman who has a YouTube channel which examines why religion is poisonous, toxic, and dangerous. I've seen it. It's wonderful. So here she is. She's joining us. And she asked a question. I'm hosting you. I'm doing your job now.
Yeah.
Can I ask Mohamed a question? Why does he think many Black people are tied to religion? And she says, I'm the only Black atheist among my family and peers now. Go.
Oh,
Now you're answering for an American, which is a totally different experience.
I want to say thank you to, what's her name again?
It's the Afro-Atheist. You can find her on
Yes,
YouTube.
thank you so much for your question. It's a great question. I found the answer in psychology. Religion, as I describe it, is like a mental robbery. Imagine yourself in a bank and the robbers get in the bank and a gun pointed to your head, right? You can't do anything, but if the robbery lasts long, every second the gun on your head is putting an imprint in your head, in your brain. So at some point, you will develop something like a PTSD or a long-term scares of that robbery. So the practice has lasted so long that even after the robbery, after the hostage was released, people struggle to sleep. And for the Black community, it came at two different forms. Whites were given religion and they use it as a business. Blacks were given religion and were taken as a slave. So you have the process of your identity being ripped off and your physical condition being completely suppressed. It lasts so long that your ancestry and your family doesn't even have the ability to free. The idea of not thinking of God is a fear. That's the reason why, from my perspective, it's hard to get some to change.
Preach it. Come
on. So I think what we could do is to just be patient a little bit, and to those who are ferociously godly, give them room, some time to breathe. And slowly they're going to come up with few questions that might help you help them. One just example is this. I have a cousin who was, what's the drepanosis in English? She has sickle cell disease. So sickle cell disease is like a blood issue, right? So I traveled to Ivory Coast one time in 2000, I believe it was 18. And in the house, found people sitting in a pre-funeral condition. It's like a dark environment, like someone is about to die. For having grew up there, I know when I see that setting, I know what's going on. Because the imams that were called to do the prayer, these are like a pre-death prayers. Like they praying for the person's soul to go peacefully. Well, now with the cancer in the family, I just like push everybody away. Call a friend of mine who works at the who is an EMT, emergency medical technician, told him, and he just was generous enough to send an ambulance. I told him, when you send an ambulance, send a police, 2 police officers. So they come in, and because of the police, nobody could do anything. So we took my cousin, take her to the hospital immediately. What happened is, because of her sickle cell disease condition, whenever she has her menstrual cycles, she goes through deep crisis. So the doctor asked, hey, we can help her, but her monthly crisis is going to worsen the situation. So there are two solutions for it. Either you have enough money to buy the medication over time, or because she's already over 40, we can just suppress her menstrual cycle so she wouldn't have any crisis anymore. I said, okay, give me 5 minutes with her. I explained to her. She said, no, if she can be okay, that's all she needs. So that's it. She never got sick anymore. So she came home and she became my disciple. I'm like a Jesus now. And she would tell them, just if you could just listen to him one single time. I think so for the Black community, the robbery has lasted too long. Yes. Yeah. And the idea of being free from it is too heavy. If I get free, if you've watched some slavery movies, even after slavery was abolished in the US, some didn't know where to go because they were born from grandparents who were enslaved. And that's even, let's just take it back a little bit. In I think it's Deuteronomy in the Bible, when God says that your slaves are to come from the nation around you, from them you may own slaves. They will be your slave forever, and your children might use them as inheritance. Who does that? It's cruel. It's really heavy. So if you get a generation and generation and generation in this, it becomes like a breathing tool for them. Without it, they will be fearful for their everyday life. So what we should do is to come up with a really soothing mechanism to find a way to talk to them, because everything is driven by fear. We could give them time to manage that fear slowly. It's like helping someone with PTSD. I think
you got to watch a video I shared with Lon. But do you find that it's a different experience being Black from Africa as it is from being the United States, Caribbean? Because everybody has a different experience.
It is different, but in terms of religion, we have a lot in common.
Yes,
it is different.
Okay,
but the same way Christianity came through colonization. Before colonization in Africa, in Ivory Coast, for instance, the north of Ivory Coast borders with Mali, which is closer to north of Africa. Islam had come there. For instance, my name is Mohamed. Mohamed is not my identity. It's the Islamization of my community that brought in the name Mohamed. And my name Cisse is not my name either. So technically speaking, I have no identity.
And a new one.
Getting a new one will sound like a more rebellious.
I can get you a phony passport.
So we have different experiences, but the map seems to be the same. So what I do is I explain to them like, hey, you don't feel obliged to name your kid Muhammad anymore, because the idea was Muhammad is the name of the prophet. It's an Islamic name. Well, it's not an Islamic name, because when the Prophet Muhammad was born, he was given the name Muhammad, but he only received the message of Islam after 40 years of his life. And his father's name was Abdullah. His father didn't see him born.
Yeah, I always thought the words of the prophets were written in the subway wall, but let's turn this back over to the moderator.
Yeah, I'm actually, we're going to go back to audience question.
All one point, very religious, and you were preaching that religion. Was there ever a moment where you had a logical moment of awakening during the time you were religious, where you thought, well, what about this? That doesn't make sense. And an example, just as an example, God is supposed to be all loving and kind and forgiving. Why did he send the flood and kill everybody? Those kind of things. Was there a moment during your time of being religiously brainwashed where you had a moment of clarity and logic, and what was that, if you remember?
Okay, so first quickly for our online audience, the question was for all the panelists, when we were still very strongly religious, did we ever have a moment of logic, clarity, where we realized this just didn't make sense? I'll go first. I remember my first one was actually when I was about 8 years old. And I was and am to this day, a dinosaur nut. My son, 5 years old, I am raising him as a dinosaur nut. I was 100% absolutely into dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. Everything in my room was dinosaurs, dinosaur models. I was looking at books that were for kids twice my age. You know, dinosaurs were my thing. And a big part of dinosaurs is that dinosaur family tree. My parents weren't really, they just knew I was into dinosaurs. They weren't really paying a lot of attention to what I was learning about them. And then for a science project for school, I made a family tree of the dinosaurs. And my parents informed me that my parents were young Earth creationists. The Earth is 6,000 years old. Evolution is not real. So therefore, this is not possible. And at 8 years old, because I had already been fully introduced to this, and it was so freaking clear. It was clear, it was logical, it made sense, that I flat out rejected my parents' young Earth creationism. Now, that didn't mean I rejected anything. I just came up with, well, the Bible isn't a literal 6 days creation. It isn't literally 6,000 years old. So I just kind of stretched out the creation story over a much longer period of time. So dinosaurs and evolution fit into that. But for me, from that age, evolution and an Earth billions of years old were part of my worldview.
But Satan put the dinosaurs here, John.
Yeah. So anyone else?
Tester. You want more stories about doubt, or you want another question?
I remember when I was preaching, this pastor of a church, I was a traveling evangelist. He told me that there were some people in his congregation who did not think Adam and Eve were literal. And I was shocked. And I thought, and you let them be members of your church? How could? And he said, well, I believe Adam and Eve were literal historical people. But these people, these are good Christians. They go to church, they contribute, they're loving, wonderful people. But they think that Adam and Eve, from what we know about evolution, there could not have been a first man and a first woman. And if there was, they would have come out of Africa, not out of the Middle East. And so I remember thinking in my mind, I didn't reject Adam and Eve, but I remember thinking, well, these people have a different interpretation than me. Then is that enough for me to disfellowship from these people just because we have a different? And I remember a little thing in my brain clicked that, okay, we can disagree. And so I had to move from being a hard-nosed fundamentalist, binary, absolute brain into more of a more accepting. And that started me kind of moving away. And of course, now, of course, Adam and Eve is a myth.
So I see a connection, is that paleontology, history, and evolution were one of the big things that impacted your thought process.
At least for some of us, I'd say. Yeah.
I want to give a different kind of answer to that, actually. You asked sort of an intellectual question. Was there ever a time where you realized intellectually this isn't making sense? I'm going to answer that more emotionally. Because there are times when the Jewish religion is filled, Orthodox Judaism is filled with laws. The laws relate to actions and also laws regarding personal status. Who can marry who can have an aliyah? You know what I'm talking about in terms of jargon. Who can have an aliyah in the synagogue? Who can say the blessing when they come to the synagogue of reading the Torah? All kinds of laws. And I do recall times when I was maybe teaching one of those laws, or one of those laws would come up in a class or in other kinds. I would say to myself, I am not going to do this. Meaning I'm going to quit before I come into a situation where I have to actually go and tell a person, you cannot participate in this ritual. You cannot get married. You know, we had a situation once, for example, where there was a member of the community who wasn't Jewish according to the strict rules. But then what's going to be when they want a bar mitzvah, and we have to torture ourselves into designing a ceremony that satisfies them, but also doesn't embarrass them, but doesn't violate the rules. You know, I'm going to quit before I have to do that again one more time, because I don't want to be in that situation. So that I was.
Okay, now I think for the sake of time, I want to try to get as many questions as we can. And obviously all of us love talking. Every question, if it's for an individual, that person will answer. Every other question, we'll just let two people answer and then move on to the next question so we can get through as many. So Shauna, could you please give us the next question?
Okay, so the next question is actually quite similar. I did have the question from Afro-Atheist on my list, and there was another question from an African person that I will add to that. And they say, as we live in Africa, the tribe and family is very important to us. Were you not afraid to lose your special place in the tribe and family? Are you aware that they will probably consider you the enemy now? It's a thing that is keeping me from coming out as an atheist, says the questioner.
Well, yeah, it looks like I'm the star of the table.
I asked you a similar question this morning at breakfast, but okay.
Can you please read the question again?
Sure. Okay. As we live in Africa, the tribe and family is very important to us. Were you not afraid to lose your special place in the tribe and family? Are you aware that they probably consider you the enemy now? It is a thing that is keeping me, the questioner, from coming out as atheist.
Okay. Thank you so much. I think the question is of essence. It's really valuable. Again, it comes to fear and education. When I was in Africa, I had a problem with challenging my parent when it comes to religion. I was becoming atheist even while I was in Cote d'Ivoire. For instance,
Can you explain the significance of tribal in African culture? Because it's a big deal.
okay, tribal, your tribe is what makes you. It's like, it's not like I hear that we have freedom. No, you're not out of it, you're nobody. Right? So if you don't follow the norms, screw you, you're done. But I have to say that coming to America was, in all honesty, a really big deal in my process of deconverting. Because no matter how smart I was, I couldn't take certain fight. But not because I was in Africa that I couldn't take it. I think what I needed was education. I'll give you two reasons for it. The first is female genital mutilation. When my daughter was born, when my girlfriend gave birth and it was a girl, the first thing my mom was expecting was, because I'm her first child, my child would have to undergo this before she's clean.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and I said to my mom, like, you know, somebody's gonna go to jail, right? That was condescending. But it was because of the joy I was feeling for my daughter, right? So now when I came to US after taking some communication classes, conflict management classes, I realized that, oh, I could have used verbal judo to adjust the way I talk. So when I went back to Cote d'Ivoire, I apologized officially to my mother for having said that. Not because I was going to now subject my daughter to it, but because I want to fix my own mistake. And I explained slowly to my mom why female genital mutilation is not a good thing to have. It took me time to do it, but I was willing to explain it in full respect of our traditions, like what you did in the introduction, acknowledging the land, acknowledge the unfairness, acknowledging the process, but left let's move together, right? So yes, if I know what I know today, if I knew it then, things would be different. But like I said in the beginning, now many of them know that I'm godless. But with my tactical way of talking to them, my acceptance of their rejection, that's really important. If you want to rebel, you have to be willing to accept that people will not accept your rebellion. You can't just refuse what people want and accept people to accept you. So my willingness to accept their rejection of me creates a comfort. So the complexity that I have dissipates. And I tell them like, well, it's fine. You may not like me as a godless. That's okay. But if we have to go from point A to B, can we do that? And then we do our fight after that. They will say yes. So yeah, it is, you can be considered as an enemy, but if you learn how to communicate, and I'll be happy to engage with whoever asks that question to see how we can adjust the way we talk to people who disagree with us. I think the whole key is in the
It
communication.
sounds like they're in Africa still.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal to come into North America. It's cool, but to be in Africa,
Yeah.
that's so you connect. Yeah, sure.
I would be happy to connect, and then we can
next step.
exchange. It's
Yeah.
really important.
Can I add something to what Mohamed said a little earlier?
Sure.
There are scholars like Chris Cameron who have documented a long, proud history of atheism, agnosticism, skepticism, and doubt among the African American community, scholars and writers and activists, even pre-Civil War, documents of captured African slaves who were open atheists, who were challenging the church and the religion. So maybe you're right that in general, there tends to be a tendency among the enslaved to be more religious. There's a big history of a lot of proud thinkers who have fought that tradition.
Yeah, I mean, that is true, but that's the reflection of this table, all right? TCP is now, I mean, just 1,200 members. Why? Because when you go against the majority, you are isolated. So those scholars, those, documented atheism were among the people who they literally suppressed them from the writing. One thing I love about American history is the ability for me to learn about whatever bad thing that happens. In Arabic society, you don't get to read that much of a history book. The majority of things I read in Arabic were just good things. But in America, you get to read about everything. So it gives you balance. I mean, in English, let's say, it gives you a balance of variety of perspectives. So yes, they were atheists, but they were not atheists as atheists. I can say that for sure. Because what we call atheists today, if we want to put it in context, it's like, for instance, the rejection of Christianity and Islam and Hinduism of known religion, all right? But someone can be atheist, but be a shaman. Like I have an uncle who is now Muslim, but he still prayed to the river of the village. So they call him atheist because they have classified atheism as the rejection of the traditional religion. And that's one of the successful paths of religion. They suppress your identity, so you are no longer who you are without them. So my son's name is Eli. If I take him to Ivory Coast today, some of my parents will not come next to him because I didn't give him the name of Abu Bakr, Abdullah, Mohamed. It's just an identity crisis.
Okay, Shauna, next question.
Next question is for Lon, and the question. Sorry, and the question is, have you been able to rationalize when you had your conversion experience why that happened to you and what caused you to have that warm, fuzzy feeling that you spoke about earlier?
Well, of course, that experience was in my head because I read about it, okay? And also when we were going to the Pentecostal church, one of the lady pastors said that I was gonna be a pastor when I grew up. So, you know, people put seeds in your head and they pop up on you when you're least expecting it. Yeah.
Any more questions from our audience here? Okay, online, Shauna?
Okay, the next question. Do panelists, sorry, where was I? Yeah, so people are talking about how singing together and eating together and community service are all great things and things that all of you participated in your positions as religious leaders. How can we have that as atheists?
Yeah, we were talking about this last evening at the dinner table, talking about looking at population centers where our people are and having like a leader for that area and have them plan social events and get-togethers and as well as social service projects. In other words, we were talking about taking the Clergy project to the next level, and this we must do. Yeah.
I would like to quickly address some of the online discussion going on about particular members dominating the discussion. It's inevitable. Some are going to speak more than others. I don't think anybody here has said anything that anybody else disagrees with. Much of what one person says is the same thing that other people would say. I'd ask you, please appreciate the panel and what everybody's contributing rather than bickering with each other, please. Thank you very much. Shauna, next question. Yes.
To what the president says.
Yeah.
Again, it comes to this psychological game. We used to something, we miss it when we don't have it, right? Personally, I want to learn the godless gospel. But I would say music and art are driven forces of who we are, right? Sing what you loved in church. It wouldn't hurt you. If you look at the process of keeping people religious, go to church. If you don't go, willfully go. You will see the pattern. Like they take you in an emotional journey in the setting. Like these beautiful songs. And now they're becoming even more sophisticated. They come to a projection screen, and then we have to sing it together. It's like a nursing process. So you won't escape.
You know, interesting. One of my favorite, it's a religious ritual, of course. One of my favorite experiences as an atheist was a couple of years in a row, we went to our friend, the Rabbi's house for Passover. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved the rituals, the prayers, the stories, the sharing. And it was, you can do that without being religious.
Yeah.
That's my, in fact, on the way over here, I was singing in my head, God, yeah. Okay. One of my favorites. So yeah, there's good things in the ritual of being together.
Yeah, I'd like to I'd like to add one more thing here. I mentioned before that I spoke at the American Atheist National Conference in 2009. I was pretty much never asked back again. Every other speaker there was there to basically talk about why all the religious people are wrong. I got up with my perspective of being an atheist in the China experience to address problems that I saw in North American atheism. So one of those issues I brought up was, very frequently I see atheists complain about all these religious groups that very deliberately target immigrants, foreign students, groups like this that are vulnerable. Because they're vulnerable, they don't have a community. And I said to them, well, why aren't we reaching out to those people?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like with me being the director for CFI in Vancouver, this is specifically one of the things I want to do when foreign students are coming here or immigrants are coming here, to reach out to them and let, like, right now, the only place where they find community here is in the churches. They're the ones who are inviting them. They're the ones giving them dinners, helping them get homes. Why are we bitching, complaining about all of them when we're sitting on our asses doing nothing? Yeah. So yeah, community is important, but we can create that community by reaching out, by inviting people, by creating that. This is not sole domain of religious people, of Christians. They're not the only ones who can get a group of people together for a pancake dinner. This is actually something I'm quite passionate about. And as I said, it made me persona non grata at American Atheists for daring to take that side. But I think it's a very good question. It's a very important one for us to be looking at. Yes.
There is a question from the live audience, gentlemen. Yeah.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me on the.
I'll rephrase.
This is actually a question for you. Can you hear me?
Shlomo.
Shlomo. Okay. What do you think about secular humanist synagogues?
Okay. So sorry again.
So what does he
What do you
think?
think about secular humanist synagogues?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what does Shlomo think of secular humanist synagogues?
All right, I don't want to go too much off a topic that's of general interest. For me personally, all I can say is, for those, I do know people in that movement, and for those to whom they enjoy that and it's a source of joy and happiness in their lives, I only wish them well. And it personally, to me, I don't find that to be the type of Judaism that gives me the type of sentimental connection to it, or even the type of joy for me. So I don't go in that direction. Let's talk about it later on. I'll give you some more about that later on. Okay.
Yeah. All right. We'll do an online one and then come to you. All right. So Shauna, another question?
Okay. So question is, do members of the panel think that people who are still in clergy truly believe what they preach and believe that they're doing God's work in a humble manner? Or have you seen evidence that there are a great many clergy who are actually feeling rewarded by having power and influence over others and just want to stroke their egos?
That's a good one.
Mechanical question.
You know what? There are some people who genuinely serve humbly, but oh my goodness, there's a lot of ego. Some of the most evil things that I've ever seen. Now, I was very, very high up in my denomination. I like to say I was the Pope for a year and a half. I was in charge of the denomination around the world, but I also mixed with many, many other churches. And when you are someone who is considered high, boy, you get to see behind the scenes. It's just shocking. I was in a church, 5,000 people. They had area pastors. I'm in this guy's office. He's got a file wall to wall, and all it is files on the individuals who are members or adherents to the church. And he brings a file out and shows it to me. Like, it's none of my business, but he did it anyway. They have reports on them, what they've done, what they think they've done, but the backstabbing that goes on, the things that people do to further their career and sabotage somebody else's. And I've seen pastors escorted out of churches by security. Never mind. I could go on and on and on, but there's a lot of what it is. And again, there are people who serve humbly as service, but then I see an awful lot of egos and pushing and shoving and jockeying for position. And Mohamed's got his hand up.
I like to take the personal aspect out of it. People who did that didn't do it because they were who they were, but it's like again, a phenomenon of psychology of human being. If you don't have a power, you're prone to humbleness. You try for something. And religion has understood that for a long time. If you take Quran or Bible, it's more of a general speaking than a God speaking. It's like power struggle. There is a website, Dark Matter 2525. It's not a website, it's a YouTube channel. They have a series of power corrupt. They goes into an explanation of the psychological phenomenon of how our attitude changes as the position grows. Leave that, take just a corporate environment. You are a part of a team, you are a team lead, you're a supervisor, and you're a manager. Your attitude changes as you move forward. And people tend to not want to lose that power. It makes them genuinely ignore what the truth is inside of them, because if they admit to that truth, they will lose that power.
You know what? People pump us up. That's the thing. People put us as religious leaders on pedestals. I remember some poor guy, he sent me in some country, sent me by motorcycle taxi, and he got ripped to shreds by the pastor because you do not treat Reverend Grady that way. He is like Billy Graham is here. You must treat him like Jesus.
That's right.
Come on, seriously. There's where the poison can come from.
It is a build.
I appreciate the respect, but you're right, it's the buildup.
Yeah, like in Islam, that for instance, in my community, women were not supposed to serve the meal to their husband standing. Have to put your knees on the floor and put the food down, right? Like, I was not supposed to look at my elders eye to eye. That's a sign of disrespect. And that's not my community making it up. It's in the 10 Commandments.
Now we're talking about women.
I would assert that we all figure this out sooner or later. And then it becomes a question, do we keep up with the performance and enjoy the respect we get, or do we have to get out and do something else? I mean, Jesus obviously was not a very good carpenter, so he became a rabbi. But for the rabbi to decide he's not going to be a rabbi anymore and he's going to be a plumber, that's not going to, you can get crucified for that kind of stuff.
And this is a good example of where not everybody in TCP thinks the same. I disagree.
Okay, great.
Simply because I think there are a significant number of people, including religious leaders, who lack the capacity for logical thought, for critical thinking. You have to have a certain capacity to be able to analyze things, to recognize, and I think there are some people who simply, in fact, I'm certain there are people who simply do not have that capacity. And for those people, they're never going to doubt it. They are going to blindly believe it.
Yes, but at the same time, they're rational on another level, and so we all have a capacity for rationality. And then what do you do?
Anyway, this is a debate that goes on quite a bit in our forums. I think we have time for one more question. I think we had one at the back.
I see atheism as a branch of education because it covers a lot of our natural history in order to prove that the unitary deity. Is it good to teach people about the divisions between different literatures, like the Jewish Torah as Hebrew literature? I don't call it Bible anymore because the tenets of the Torah is not to be a world religion. It's just an exclusive literature for the Jewish people, culturally. So that's why when I address others, the division between the Hebrew Bible, I use Hebrew Bible as a separate book, and the Greco-Roman literature, which is the New Testament, as another literature.
Yeah,
that's how I put division. So
right.
It's a good idea to not to use the general word Bible, because this is where people get mixed up.
That's a beautiful contribution. Please go ahead.
So sorry, let me quickly reiterate the questions. The question is just commenting about looking at scriptures, the Bible and other religious scriptures, more from a literature rather than as a single scripture or anything like that. And I think pretty much everybody here would, like, for me, I'm a student of culture. Religion is a part of culture. Learning about those religions and how it's affected those cultures is important. It's simply when that's elevated to a point of being authority, that's where I would have problems. This is literature, no problem at all. Sorry.
So we have a question about, I'm really interested in what they have to say to people who are still in Christian ministry, or other religious ministry, and don't want to leave because it's a good job for them. And I kind of touched on that. Do we keep up the performance because it pays well, because we enjoy it, because we don't have any other skills and we're afraid to leave? And so I think that's why TCP exists. People that are in ministry that no longer believe can look at TCP's website and join us and get some support.
Actually, I'd go a little further than that, because this is asking what would we say to those people? Somebody who is an atheist, who is still practicing and has no intention of getting out. I would actually challenge them. You are deliberately choosing a life, something comfortable for you, in return for lying to other people.
That could be hard.
No, well, just a second, okay. Okay, I know that this is gonna different people are gonna my position. If it's somebody who's trapped and wants to get out, that's one thing. Somebody, and I'm talking more on the fundamentalist side here, not more liberals. But for someone who is a fundamentalist, who is teaching people that they are going to hell, who is teaching them all the things that we in TCP are saying are child abuse, are damaging, psychological damage. They are willingly doing that without any intent of getting out so that they can get a salary. I have major problems with that.
Yeah, and we get a question from the young lady in the back.
No, I wanted to comment on
sorry.
this question.
Yeah, sorry.
Jonathan, thank you. I really admire what he says. I don't think what he says was a question, even though he phrased it as a question, but I think it's a great contribution. I didn't think about it that way, but I think I might include it in my future communication techniques in order to dissociate or to create some sort of critical thinking in the head of the person I'm talking to. Call it like the Hebrew literature and Greco-Roman literature. I think it might help because the reason why it's still the best-selling book in my hotel room and any hotel you go to, it's because of the aggregate connotation or spelling of Bible. They combine the whole mumbo jumbo into the Bible, and it became a label, like a trademark. It's solid. So if we disassociate, like you say, I think it might help with communication.
And the Hebrew literature was not the Jewish people has no motive of translating it into another language. It was only during Ptolemy that we wanted the Torah or the Bibles of Moses translated to in Greek. So it's not the intention of the ancient Hebrew or Jewish to make it translated into a different language so that will become a worldwide religion.
So was it a business for the Romans?
I think it became a political
too, right?
Okay.
Can I add?
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to add a thought about that question that was asked. What would you say to someone who's in the clergy who says they don't believe? And you make a distinction, which I think is very important, between denominations. There's a big difference between doing that in a fundamentalist denomination and a much more liberal one.
Exactly.
I want to tie that back to what you said about, to take a little bit of a different direction, to tie that to what you said about secular humanist Judaism. That was a question that was posed to me by some family members. They'd say to me, Shlomo, I get it. You don't believe in orthodoxy. You don't want to do all the orthodox rituals. Why give up being a rabbi? Why not just switch from being an orthodox rabbi to being a secular humanist rabbi? And then you can do weddings and funerals and life cycle events and just be a liberal and just do that, you know?
There you go.
And that's an interesting point to question. I think some people might have that. Some people in the clergy might have that question themselves. I'll just give an answer to that. And one is a more intellectual answer, which I'm going to skip just because it's longer here and a little bit more difficult to talk about. But one other observation is, to me, in my experience, that can be the greatest source of strife within community. When someone says, I've just realized, I've seen the light, orthodoxy is not right, but liberal denominations are, then you have a fight. Then you're coming and taking a position. Now I'm right and you're wrong. Whereas to simply come and say, I have decided to live a different lifestyle, and then you can live and let live. You can say, I'm doing this and you do that, and you don't have to argue. And I think that's an important point too, just in terms of being able for people to live to each other in peace, just take that real clear stand. Just a comment.
Yeah, now, when I was saying to John that judgment might be harsh, I was thinking of the people who have been ministers, rabbis, or whatever for decades. They have no other education. They've got children. They don't own a house because the congregation owns it. And if they come out of their faith, not only it's not for themselves, but if they come out, they're out of a job overnight. They're homeless. They can't feed their kids. So that's what I was saying. Then there are people who are like that. But I do hear you. I couldn't do it. You know, if you're evangelical, I could not do that. But,
Right,
anyway,
no,
that's
but
what I'm
here, I
talking
think
about.
the question, the way it was phrased, was simply people who are there because they're comfortable in it. Yeah, it's not that they're comfortable, they're happy, they're making good living. So I do want to clarify that, particularly so I'm not misquoted on this. I'm not talking about people who are there and are trapped. They would get out if they could. Okay, and I think that's more what, I think that's more what you're talking. I think that's more what you're talking about. Okay, people who are in there who are there because they're trapped. If they could get out, they would, but they're trapped. Okay,
That's all.
I'm not talking about people who are in more liberal denominations where the message may not be that. I'm talking about people in more fundamentalist places that are teaching messages that I consider to be dangerous, to be damaging, who have no desire, who are there deliberately, that even if they could get out, they wouldn't, because the life they have is a comfortable life.
Yeah, so a more liberal denomination can, be much less abrasive and much less harmful, and can in effect be a humanist organization that happens to have a steeple overhead.
But
Give you a license. But
Yeah.
you got nothing.
Yeah. And there's that.
I've got it.
Okay, so our time is wrapping up. I would like quickly, one more important question, which I think we need to address, is I've seen several people raising questions about what TCP does to help our members. So Lon, if you could address that quickly, like our for finding jobs, for psychological counseling, all that type of thing.
Yeah, so we do have a program in place where people can get psychological counseling through the Secular Therapy Project, and in some cases we have TCP participants who are trained to do that, and we can refer people to them too. And we also have vocational transitional assistance that we provide for them. So help with interviews, because if all you've done is be a preacher for the last 50 years, you're probably not good at things like interviews and resumes and things like that. So we help.
You used to talk to people. Now people have to talk to you.
Yeah. So we do this. So we subsidize the counseling part, the psychological counseling, at $50 up to 12 sessions. And as far as transitional assistance, vocational transitional assistance, we pay for that entirely. What else do we do?
Occasionally, we have passed the hat for a hardship grant for somebody. Like when Jerry DeWitt was going to lose his car because they they changed the locks of the church and they threw them out, that kind of thing. And so occasionally we've done things like that.
Yeah, occasionally, and that's on a case-by-case basis, so.
And then I think most importantly is just provide the community among a group of people who really understand what each other are going through and supporting and helping each other.
Just that's the joy that I get from TCP. To be the one to sign the check to pay for those fees. I really feel genuine satisfaction every time I have to. I feel important. Like the president needs me. I don't need that's my power. I'm losing my head for it.
But the biggest thing that
You last election.
the biggest thing that we face when we turn atheists is we feel like we're all alone. And
That's
the biggest thing that the Clergy Project offers is to let people know you're not alone, and we can talk with each other. We can be on the forums and communicate with each other. We have a closed Facebook group. We have a Friends of the Clergy Project Facebook group, but we're not alone anymore unless we really want to be.
You know what else
Yeah.
though? I found one commonality most of us have. We talked about this on the forums, and that is that we all have still have the desire to help people. Only now we don't do it because we're afraid of going to hell if we don't. We do it because we want to do it.
That's right.
And what Mohamed's saying, helping people. I still do it. I love helping people. And I don't know anybody in a Clergy Project who does not have that basic reason for having gone into ministry in the first place. Ta-da, there you go.
I just fetch the water.
Yeah, and you're good at it too. Look at that.
Darn
You
good.
didn't turn
Okay.
it into wine though. What's going on?
All right, guys, I'm gonna have to kind of shut down conversation here. Finally, to wrap up, I would like to make my final pitch for CFI, the Center for Inquiry. We are a nonprofit organization, nationally in Canada, Center for Inquiry in Canada, and then locally in Vancouver. This is our first event in Vancouver in several years. It was shut down for a while. I've just recently taken over. This event, majority of it was put together just by myself. I am actively looking for people, particularly those in the Vancouver area, that would like to get involved, to volunteer, to help out. Anybody who's interested, if you're here, talk to me. If you're online, contact me afterwards. I'm actively looking for people to help us out, and please go to our website where we are supported by donations. So a lot of people gave donations to come live or to attend Zoom. Please, if it's kind of passing that offering plate around, but yeah, we need your support. If you think what we did here is good today, I want to do a lot more stuff like this. If you help us, support us to do that by volunteering, by donating, that helps us to do more stuff like this. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks to the CFI, and thank you so much, John Lombard. This was great.
Thanks everybody for
thanks,
coming.
Dan. Yeah, I would like to thank Dan for coming out for this. Shlomo for coming all the way from Dominican Republic for this.
Costa Rica.
Sorry, Costa Rica. Sorry, from Costa Rica for
I
this.
put that in your head.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and just everybody. Thanks. I'm the only one on this panel who didn't have to travel here for this. So thank you for everybody for taking the time, the energy to do this. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. Feel free to contact any of us afterwards. Yeah, and that's it. Thank you very much.
And John, special thanks to you for all the work you've done to organize it. Much appreciated.
My pleasure, very much so.
Thank you for everyone who joined us remotely too. Thank you.
I'm Shauna Watson, Vice President of Center for Inquiry Canada. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, Freedom from Religion Foundation and the Clergy Project, for making this event possible. Thanks to all the panelists for coming out today, and thanks to the audience for your thoughtful questions. A special thank you to John Lombard, our new CFIC Vancouver branch leader, for making our inaugural event a great success. Center for Inquiry Canada is your community for scientific, skeptical, secular, rational, and humanistic inquiry. We provide a variety of events, in person and online, across the country and around the world. We offer panels like the one we presented today, as well as conferences, lectures, small group discussions, social events, and support groups. We invite you to check out our website, cficanada.ca, where you can sign up to receive our newsletter, become a member, or make a donation.